Good to go.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank. I'm here with Ginny.
Hi.
Did I say it right? I felt like I did.
You did say it right. Yes, Ginny is perfect.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
So, hi, I am. So, my full name is Shinjini, which is why Robbie said is Ginny right? Or did he say it right? I am a postdoctoral researcher. And if you're wondering what that is, it's when you finish your PhD and they can't hire you as permanent faculty yet. So, you're in this weird limbo state as called a postdoctoral researcher. And I work at the University of Bristol, and I've just moved here after finishing my PhD at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm a neuroscientist.
Yes, neuroscience. So I've talked to people with neuroscience in the realms of sleep, also some brain mechanisms in response to certain different stimulants. But what particular are you focused in with neuroscience?
So what I study is basically how different parts of the brain kind of talk to each other. So it's sort of what we call long range connections. So, say, for example, how the front of your brain might talk to the back of your brain, or how different centers, so say how your visual center might talk to your auditory center, things like that. So I focus particularly on part of the brain that's called the prefrontal cortex, which is sort of this study does is like this decision-making center. So it's like sort of integrates input that comes from different brains, and it computes it, and it sends back a sort of decision in a way of what you're going to do. So whether that's, are you going to have cereal for breakfast, or are you going to have toast for breakfast? So it's kind of decisions like that, but also decisions that are more sort of instantaneous. So if you were maybe a bit threatened, whether you would choose to fight or flight. And then, depending on what choice you're making, it would interact with different parts of the brain. And so I'm interested in the second. So there has to be two structures for an interaction, right? A minimum of two structures. And so I'm looking at how the prefrontal cortex interacts with the thalamus, or, which is a subcortical structure, as we call it. It's a midbrain structure, not a cortical structure. And I am studying this, so sort of how this develops, but my background during my PhD, I worked on models of autism spectrum disorders and intellectual disability. And so I'm trying to work on that during my postdoc as well, and trying to see whether our findings can translate into these sort of, looking at these sort of disorders.
Also with, because I know, bring it back a little bit to decision-making, or even choice making. That's a weird, because you could base it on two different things. You could base it also on what's morally right and wrong. Like this can be easily seen with like serial killers, for instance. There's a lot of times they'll bring in like someone for psychiatry to talk about if this person might be not know that they're doing something wrong. Like, for some movies that you can see, some people go, I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. Goes, you didn't know robbing that store was wrong? I was like, what are you talking about? I wanted money. I got money. And it's a simple connection as that, but also boils down into something a little bit more complex. I mean, we take for granted every single day as people of how complicated our bodies really are. I mean, we just expect to wake up in the morning, expect everything to work functioning properly. And that's luck in itself, I think, in a lot of ways as well, too. I mean, the fact that we don't wake up and we just have vision, what happens if that just went away just because something happened where our eyesight got disconnected from whatever thoughts or whatever mechanism that causes to make our brain to be able to let us produce these moving pictures. But when you base decision making based off morally or what is right, like for instance, somebody sticking their hand on a stove and not having the reflex to pull it away, they keep it on there to the point where it hurts. I mean, our wires can get crossed in certain ways too. And I just find that fascinating how the brain works. Like people always want to explore space. People want to explore our oceans. I just want to find out what's in our head.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And so it's like, so there's obviously the human decision making, which which is what we talk about. But I'm talking about what I'm studying is sort of much more. It is not that high level of decision making, right? It's much more. If I put you in an artificial situation and you're given a limited number of choices, what choice do you make? If I give you choice A or B, what you're looking at, and so it's that sort of. More not as elaborate decision making as there's morality, there's society, there's a lot of factors that affect whether I choose to wear yellow today or not. There's a whole bunch of factors. It might just be that I felt like wearing yellow, and it might be a whole bunch of other things. So it's I'm looking at more sort of instantaneous decision making as opposed to informed long-term decision making, and then
Well, we talk about instantaneous decisions, for instance, even if it was an instantaneous, if you decided to wear yellow today, what about the people that
Mm-hmm.
overthink the word yellow and think that maybe yellow could be aggressive to some people?
Mm-hmm.
Then it
I
becomes
mean,
a
yeah,
complex decision.
yes. I mean, I think most human decisions, we don't think twice about it. Some things we don't think twice about, but there's no thing as the same decision is instantaneous for all people, right?
Yes.
So there is, but then the way we study it, we artificially create these scenarios, right? So it's a much more controlled environment for this.
So if you
So
could
yeah.
give me a specific example of one thing that you find fascinating through your research, what would it be?
Ooh, I am very bad for finding everything fascinating. I'm surprised that I've chosen one thing to study, because I could go to a talk about, I don't know, how circuits are built and then find that utterly fascinating and come out and want to do a degree in electrical engineering, because I am perpetually curious. But I think what drew me to neuroscience is this fact that there's so much we don't know, and even things we do know, you change the context and everything goes to shot, So there is this thing there was a big thing, it's called engrams. So have you heard of engrams?
Mm-mm.
But you know what that is. Okay. So it's this idea of how memory is stored, right? And so when you have an incident, lots of your cells are firing away, and but then for long-term memory storage, it's very inefficient to have the same number of cells, respond. If you use up all your cells to store one memory, how are you going to go through life and go through all the others?
Yeah.
And so people, very, very intelligent people in the past, came up with this idea of engrams, which is sort of the minimum number of cells that you would require that would store this memory. And then if you were put back in the same scenario, it would sort of bring it back, right? And so you have they're called engram cells. And so people always thought that these engram cells were quite constant, right? For any given situation, they would be constant. But actually, it turns out that if you do the same thing over and over again, your engram cells change. And that's just ridiculous, because if they're constantly changing, then what cells are storing your memory? So I find that very fascinating, how memory is stored, it's formed, it's stored, and how we retrieve it,
It's been a while since I've had a cell biologist on, but I know that your cells kind of is it every 9 months or 7 months that they shed and you get new cells as well too. So technically, the person that you are, it might be years. I might be getting that time off. I do that with money as well sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, a person that you are right now is not the same person that was maybe a year ago. Not only just personality wise, but maybe on a concept of also structurally wise as well too, because you're constantly getting rid of old cells and replacing them with new cells. But if cells hold memory, how does that link down to sense or
so there
smells?
are some cells that you do shed and you grow back. So skin cells, we shed our skins. Blood cells, they're the ones that, you're constantly making new ones. But it was actually, so it was thought for the longest time that the brain, once it developed, it stayed constant, right? And all you did was, as you aged, you lost cells. And that's why, you lost memory. And that was thought to be the basis for dementia for a very long time. But actually, we've now found these type of cells. So most cells in the brain are what we call, they don't regenerate, right? They get formed, they mature, they go to the place in the brain they're supposed to be, and they tend to stay there. But actually, there are now cells that have been found, this is work in mice, that they actually produce new cells even in adults. So, when you go into the adult brain, there's actually still new cells forming. And there is a whole line of research that looks at exactly what you said. How do these new cells integrate into the existing structure? And then how might they come in and, do they take over this function of memory storage? Do they perform the same thing? We don't know.
Now I'm going to let you get a little skeptical with me here. Now, with brain tissue, for instance, brain tissue doesn't repair itself, right?
No.
Okay, so
not at the minute that we know.
Is there a type of cell therapy that can help regenerate some of this brain tissue or some type of mechanism? Because I've heard things from that music, for instance. There was a story about a person who had lost the ability to walk, and he kept going to this Metallica concert. Now, it wasn't really the Metallica music, maybe, but the good environment that he was in, the positiveness, the really joy and love and admiration of really life. People, they're called the Metallica family, basically, their fans are. Create a positive environment when he was just sitting in his own pain for so long until he decided to start going on these concerts and following them on tour. where eventually he was able to start moving his feet again. I mean, the best example of this as well too is in Cobra Kai, where the kid starts moving his foot after whatever when they go to a concert or something like that. Now, is that a sense of healing brain tissue? And I know this might not be the area of expertise or whatever, but I'm just skeptical wise with me. Now, is there a
Mhm.
possibility that if it's something like that, could we make that into more of a form where we're able to regenerate brain tissue, much like, marijuana might help out with stages of Parkinson's or things of that sort that I've heard before on this show?
So there's a whole branch of neuroscience that's called neuroregeneration, right? Which studies exactly this. So they study like spinal cord injuries and things that would cause people to lose the ability to walk. And the idea is that they're trying to look for therapies that would essentially do exactly this, like repair damaged nervous tissue, right? Now, how that integrates with environmental factors like going to a Metallica concert, I don't know. It's very hard with anecdotal evidence, right? Because somebody says something and they have caused in their head, there's a causal relationship there, right? And that, because that's what was important to them. But whether that is what was important to biology, we don't know,
This
right?
is what gets
So
me. I don't this is what's
yeah.
so fascinating to me is because if I listen to a song, if I smell a certain thing, it's linked to a certain part of my memory. So if I hear something like that, I can understand the Metallica thing, but then it starts to wonder like what is all these mechanisms? And maybe there is a science to it. Maybe we already know what that is. But a lot of this, every time
Mhm.
I talk about like the brain or anything of this sort, it's just an amazement of wonder where you're hearing something different about something else. And you're hearing, like, I got interested in schizophrenia, especially, mostly because I'd lost someone
Mhm.
to schizophrenia, that ended up taking their own life. But I started realizing, like, we don't really have a cure for it. We have a pill that helps
Mhm.
maintain the symptoms, but even then, it's upping the dosages and upping the dosages to be able to fix so. But this, I mean, for the longest time, the cure for schizophrenia was electroconvulsive therapy by using shocks to stop a certain
Yeah.
occasion that might be approaching on someone's mind when they start to experience symptoms of schizophrenia that could lead to an accident or an incident or something like that. And I'm like, I don't know why space is so popular for a lot of people when there's this thing that's right inside of us that we really don't understand. There's CTE issues. There's so much that we're uncovering more and more of every day. Yet a lot of people
Mhm.
aren't super interested. And I think it's because it's not about really the experience. This type of thing is something inside of yourself. And I mean, when it comes to issues inside of yourself, a lot of people tend to neglect these basic features, all because maybe it'll go away if they ignore it, or maybe they could take a pill and it'll go away. And I'm like, I think there's a more positive impact, like for the way people think is especially interesting to me, how I can think about one thing and you're thinking about something completely different, or how people can create their own realities in a sense. And necessarily they're not wrong either. I mean, it's just a different reality that we live in.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's completely true. I find that fascinating as well. I think there's two issues to why more people aren't interested in well, neuroscience, science in general, right? One of them is societal, right? So science is historically has been very, very elitist, and it's still quite elitist, because everything takes money. Applying to undergrad takes money. Being able to apply to grad school, especially in the US, applications take money. If you are able to get a stipend, not able to get a stipend, a lot of people work in the summer, but you have to be able to afford to work, for a lot of places for free in a lab in the summer to get the right references to be able to get into grad school, right? So there is this this gate. There's a reason it was called the ivory tower. Like academia was called an
Yeah.
ivory tower, right? Because it was very, very hard for people to get in. It's getting better, right? But it's still hard. So part of the reason I think there's not as many people interested in maybe science or pursuing an academic career is partly because of this, and the other part is like careers in academia aren't that stable. They're not very secure. For a postdoc, if you're lucky, you get a 5-year contract, but most postdocs, especially in the UK, are 1, 2, maybe 3 years. Mine's a 3-year contract. And
Well,
so you have to keep doing this, and so it takes a lot of family support, societal support, monetary support, and not everybody's in that position. The other thing, especially when it comes, what you mentioned about like schizophrenia and things, and people taking pills, is the stigma associated with it. And now, obviously, as mental health awareness is improving, and it's really, really good that there are a lot of mental health initiatives, but it kind of, a lot of it to me seems a bit like, putting a band-aid to fix a crack, because it's a deeper issue, right? Just having a 1 week mental health awareness week or a mental health awareness month, where people do things and then kind of forget all about it, especially, the movements for change, movements for having people be supported so that they're functional, and be able to live life to their fullest,
I think
and perform to their best.
it also comes with ignorance as well too. A lot of people don't want to understand the situation of what a person's going through, and that's if they can't understand it, then they just put it into a category. I mean, back before ADHD was known as something a little bit differently, it was being mentally disabled. I was put into a classroom where there was just a door and there was nothing in there, just white walls and a desk, all because they thought it was being mentally challenged. They thought I had to separate me from everybody else. But then now ADHD is kind of known. Everyone knows that I just can't sit still. I like to go all over the board. And I think that's what got me more, I guess, related or more understanding of being mentally disabled, or even having a depression issue, or even having even an addict issue. I went to school for chemical dependency, then eventually went into psychology a little bit. Hey, I didn't get like a master's degree in psychology, so I'm not claiming that. But it helped me understand more. And I think that's kind of the part and parcel that comes with everything, is that you need to be educated on a lot of these things as well too. I think a lot of people don't really know a whole lot about neuroscience, at least the common public, because there isn't really a class that focus or that is taught in the 15 years or whatever. You hear the history, you hear the reading, you hear the basic maths, but I'm like, you don't really offer these at high schools to dive into this separate course, much like Greek mythology isn't really offered in high school for that. It's more like a college class or an extracurricular where you have to incentivize people to want to go pursue that. And how do they know if they're not interested in it if you've never shown them what this is? They have to come across that themselves or have an interest in it based on something that they've seen. And I think that's where we start to see the issues with. I think the reason why mental health is now relatable now, and now it's kind of like everyone can use it as an umbrella in some ways, is because everyone kind of has a piece of it. Now, the severities are different. Insomnia, I have. So I like to hear about sleep. I like to understand that more, because if you experience something that you understand, like mental health, anybody can get it at any age. You being 40 and not having it, you being 50 not having it, doesn't mean you can never get it. You could just randomly develop it. And that's where the brain starts to get fascinating again, where I'm like, it all boils down to a basics of understanding. People like to label something as this and then not want to look into it or want to understand it more so they can keep labeling it as that. I mean, how many things have we labeled that necessarily might have the wrong label onto it? And I think that's where we boil down to my issue with like intellectual disabilities is like, what do we classify as that? First of all, our education system is very screwed up on that, because that's still ADHD is classified as the same category as being mentally challenged still in some educational institutes. I had a teacher tell me that on my show. I was like, what? Like, hang on a second. I know for a fact, but then it's like, it gets so mixed up, and you start to see that like there's just a long discourse of kind of the wrong idea, because the information at the time wasn't what we have now. And that's where we talk about the understanding capabilities again too, which is, I mean, another reason why I wanted to talk to you as well too, to talk about this subject.
Yeah, so that is, yeah, especially with the whole
if I'm wrong,
classroom
tell
thing,
me
is
please at any time.
No. I mean, it's different. So different countries use different diagnostic criteria, right, as well, right? The DSM-5, the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, I think, which is the current version. So this gets updated, right? So definitions of various disorders and things, they are constantly updated as well. But that takes time to trickle down from a clinical setting where, how you diagnose a disorder, to actual classroom benefits, right? So that if a kid presents with symptoms of ADHD or any kind of challenging behavior, how we deal with it, and that takes time, right? Because policy takes time, but even if the policy comes into effect, it becoming widespread, it becoming commonly accepted, all that takes time. So your point about raising awareness is basically hitting the nail on the head. What we need to do is actually get more people that work on this, get clinicians in and talk about these things, right? And make it just more commonly just more common for people to have these conversations, and see how best we can support people that might have additional challenges, and how they can get the same sort of fulfilling experience in school than what their predecessors weren't able to get. So yeah.
it's kind of like when I was in school, I knew ADHD was like, it was kind of like take a pill and get over it. I never took any pills for it because I was more afraid of the side effects that would come with it. Mostly, I think my doctor probably might have amped it up a little bit, but scared my parents out of not doing it. Um, but dyslexia was one of the major ones when I was in school that people talk about. Like, you have dyslexia, oh, then you get a pass on this, and it's like I don't necessarily agree with giving everybody a pass on it. I think it's more about adapting to a different form now. That means you have to make it more in their own. And I mean, it boils down to the educational teachers have too big of a workload when it comes to the matter of students they have to teach as well too. But it's also keeping it fun and engaging, but also adapting per person. Because I think, and I understand how hard that is to do. If you go to a high school with like 900 kids in one class, like one senior year or something like that, that's difficult. But it's also about where we're putting our time and effort in as well too. I mean, I think the reason why I don't just all out hate the education system is because I had a very few select group of teachers, probably four throughout all my 15 years, that really took the time and effort. One of them I had on my show as well to talk about it too, about it's those people that are incentivized to want to go chase down these educational careers and want to do these types of things too. But nobody really wants to look into something unless their kid experiences it, or someone that they know experiences it, or someone that they care about experiences it. And that's, I mean, I don't want people to feel the need that they have to do that, because all now it's going to affect their life that they have to now research into this. I'm like, you should just know ahead of time as well too. And I don't expect people to do extra education. No, but I mean, should it be that much of a job? I mean, we look at things like that as like, why should I have to go do that if it doesn't affect me? It's like, well, I don't want you to look at it like a job. Maybe just look at it in case you ever do come into a scenario, maybe a hostile situation. You don't have a situation that goes in the worst way when you can actually talk to someone. I mean, this is why we have people that are interested in suicide helplines, all because they have a different perspective of looking in on this situation, being able to help. It's not your job to talk someone down off a roof, but the people that want to do it because they actually give a shit because they understand the situation.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that you said. The first is the fact that you said, yeah, you don't hate on the education system, and I smiled at that because it's true. You can't hate on something, right? That doesn't change the system. Just going, oh, this is broken and leaving it is not going to miraculously then fix the situation, right? And so what we need, I think that's the answer to almost a lot of the world's problems. What we need is actually people that are interested in investing in these, right? Investing in these scenarios and in these causes, so that it's not such a chore to have to go and find out. So say tomorrow, your kid gets diagnosed with ADHD, you then don't have to go away and do all of your research, because this is something that, the schools have prepared for. There's somebody that's, send them some kind of guidance of, these are adaptable practices that you can use for. So something as simple as using different fonts, right? There's fonts that are better or worse for people with dyslexia or dyspraxia. So there's, things like that, things that can be done. So it doesn't become this Herculean individual task for people to go, oh, this is now going to affect my life. Where do I go to find out? And there will always be more information to be found out. But then if we can make it accessible, and this comes back to actually academia being very much an ivory tower, because a lot of academic research is behind paywalls, right? And so now open publication is becoming more of a thing. But so for a lot of people, if they want to find out more and want to find out what the science is, they actually can't, because it costs like, $90 or whatever an article, or a subscription for 1 month or something ridiculous, right? And not everyone can afford to shell out that kind of money. So I think it's it's something that has to be tackled on a lot of different levels. And unless, obviously the end result takes ages to be seen. So now that there is a push to have more open publication, have all of this, that's going to have a trickle-down effect, but it's not going to have a trickle-down effect tomorrow, right? And then it also has to be pushed for by people who are in power, who make these policies, who decide what's important and how much money is invested in what. And I think that's definitely a conversation about my pay grade, but yeah, those are my 2 cents on it.
What through your research at least, what's one thing that you just, I guess, were either appalled at, or one thing that you just like couldn't get your head wrapped around?
So one thing I was appalled at is the fact that there has been this whole Sorry, my brain's just gone blank for a second.
Welcome to Out of the Blank podcast. Happy to help.
Yes, sorry. I was just like, I had a thought and now it's gone. So I think one thing I was appalled at was how sometimes how inaccessible a lot of these, just how inaccessible a lot of academia is and how inaccessible a lot of research is. And so, it goes back to this thing of like, when I was in school, science was not a career. If you were good at studies and you were good at science, you became an engineer or you became a doctor. So I grew up in India, right? And those were your options. And if you didn't want either of them, you became a computer scientist. And that was it. That was your science options, right? And then if so doing like a bachelor's in just straight biology was not looked upon very well, because your most realistic career option was to become a teacher.
Yeah.
Right. And so I found, so it's that inaccessibility of it, but I understand why, because there's just so much, not enough people know about it, right? Not enough people are aware of just, especially in India, of straight science as a full-time career. It's getting better now. There's more outreach and things like that. But it's the same here, where a lot of scientists, like myself included, are very middle class, right? And so it's just, it's how classist it is. And I think that's something, it's not research exactly, but it's sort of within academia, just how classist it is really does bother me a lot.
I probably have the same issue. I've talked to a lot of academics on the show. I mean, out of the almost 1,000 episodes I probably have at least 700 something academics from probably every single field, and even the minor newt ones, where there's like one about just badger breeding, which is like very specific, but that person really loved that topic. But I think when you look at it, a lot of people, like where it says trust the science, or where it hits this level where it's like people don't really tear down academia, this type of talk. And I'm like, I think it's because I have come across a few people through academia that do talk down. And then that becomes an issue. And it's like, when you really look at it, and I get it, because the ivory tower thing, I think, put a good example in my head, which is it is hard as shit to get your career going in that field because of how many like roadblocks there is and how many obstacles they make you jump through. So by the time you get up there, you do feel like you're a little bit above, but I don't think that's everyone. That's definitely not everyone. I've had the best communication conversations with people that were academics. And I think that's where we start getting the understanding thing, is just talking at the same level playing field and just realizing that everyone's going through these tough times and these tough situations. I mean, I also find it weird when there are people that will scoff depending on where your degree's from, not only just the college, but also which country you prefer to get your degree from. They consider that a lower form of education. Maybe you have more resources, but you took the ability to go pursue whatever degree that was in that field that it was. That means you're obviously passionate about doing so. I mean, someone doesn't go into philosophy or sociology or whatever they want to call it for the money. That just doesn't happen. So I think there needs to be a whole perspective change on this aspect of like, I like STEM. I like these small little niche, communities, or Black STEM, whatever you want to call them. But I also I boil it down to people as well, too, no matter who you are, what you have, whatever you got. If you're interested in promoting a more education, a more overall thinking about things, too, and even with a flat earther, I'll talk to them, too, because I like the brain's kind of understanding and trying to step into another person's reality, because I think that's where you don't really see the shame aspect anymore. You start seeing the acceptance. And I think that's what really promotes society forward, is when not this giant groups of saying acceptance, but how many of those are so closed off, where I'm like, I get it for safety, but at the same time, it's like I'm not asking for world peace, but I'm asking for an easy way to understand each other just by looking through the other person's lens. And that is a very difficult thing to do, to be able to understand the pain that someone might go through, but it doesn't help to at least try.
I mean, that's true, right? Because a lot of issues happen because of this looking down on the other person that's asking you a question or questioning what you hold to be true. And I completely agree that people should speak to each other as equals, right? And that goes both ways, right? So as long as two people are open to having a conversation about a controversial topic, right, without resorting and actually when they're talking or arguing, they're attacking the arguments and not the person, because that's what it devolves to very, very quickly. And we see this in politics every single day, right? And so that's important to like you say, to have people actually trust the science. The scientists need to become humans and not just somebody that does that does something behind a closed room, right? And so that is critical, right?
Well, we're practice.
And the community.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, sorry. The communities, I think, are they are born out of necessity, but they're also incredibly empowering and can do very, very useful work and actually highlight issues, right? That people have just, like you previously said, just ignored because they've just gone, oh, this doesn't affect us at the minute. We're just gonna, put this in a box and not think about it.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
it even goes down to like open science, for instance. That's a good hashtag because it also lets the public see what other people are working on too. I go to like private hashtags like journalist or, documentarist or someone who's an author or someone who's an academic or someone who's on a PhD journey that maybe doesn't really care about being on a show or something. Because I like to see like you got a whole different thoughts. You got something, and you don't need to be someone that's on a Joe Rogan or need to be someone that's on the TV talking about a certain issue. You got something that you actually, it might be like, hey, it's interesting to me, but it's like it's actually pretty interesting when you start expanding, like letting the public know what's going on these aspects of things too. That's the beneficial side too. But when you come onto Twitter, I mean, Twitter's a bad place to try and find a lot of it, depending on what groups. It's usually a hard place to get like good content for stuff, but it's also a great place of sharing ideas. I think that's what social media has a very beneficial aspect to, but also like those sharing of ideas and those follows, or even just looking at someone's basis, you get to judge about a person and also start to understand how a person sees things. It opens up a different doorway. I know, I get it, it's hard through social media, but I mean, even just treating someone like just with the bare necessity of like, I mean, I'm 23. I'm guessing you're around the same age as I am.
No, I'm a lot older.
How old are you?
But that's okay. I'm 29. Not a lot older.
That's not old. I was like, I thought you were gonna toss out like 60. I was like, holy shit, you moisturize. No, but I think it's important because it does, even no matter if it's age, if it's a younger person talking to an older person, if it's an older person talking to a younger person, there's this idea of understanding that really starts with the basis of just wanting to. And I think that's important because I mean, science is fascinating as hell to me. I also love the magic kind of stuff too. I'm all over the board because I found myself super interested in one thing, which was psychiatry and really kind of understanding like the psychology about a lot of shit that people really experience on a daily basis and how a lot of things get misunderstood. But I also like the way people think about things. And you start to realize whether it's a person who's into the weirdest conspiracy theories to the person that's into like the most normal stuff, they think along the same basis, but they all have this more different kind of roadway they take. And I'm like, that's what it is. I mean, the perspectives of things are intense and awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I agree with the social media thing for sure, because you get, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of downsides to social media as well. But the good thing I found about social media and about, like academic Twitter, which is, I suppose, the part of Twitter that I am most active in, it's really nice because you get people that come in with all different perspectives, all different backgrounds, and they sometimes voice their concerns. They will share victories, they will share failures, and it's all very supportive. And I really, really like that. What is interesting to me from a social, like from I don't know what perspective this is, but like as a bystander, I suppose, is you can go and look at people's echo chambers and see, what the little echo chamber that they formed and what their views are and how they're reinforced. And I find that fascinating.
Check out my algorithm guy is so mad at me because I'm like all over the board. I'm all the way on this side, and then I'm all the way on the other side. I'd like that, but it does get a little bit difficult because I disagree only with certain things, and I think the things I disagree with, but I'm willing to understand. It's just when there are people like I saw a page that say like all children can be born racist. I'm like, all right, what like. Now I just look at it like you're so one-sided onto something where I'm like, you gotta at least like, oh, I like the open community aspect of things. I think that's why, I mean, you can't judge me off one episode. You'd have to look back through a couple, but I think, I can come off as a crazy nut in a lot of my episodes. I'm happy you did my show because I know some episodes recently were probably a little bit crazy, but there's also a more serious, more willing to learn. And I think that's like that with every single person that you meet. And people want to put you into a category, whether you're on wealth class, whether you're on social status, whether you're on intellectual abilities. Man, some of the people that are the worst academics are probably some of the smartest people outside of it. And then some of the people that are smartest academics are, not so nice outside of academia as well too. And I look at it like you can't judge it by whatever a person pursues, but you can understand what they're pursuing by looking at who they are as a person. I mean, a lot of people that are really come from bad backgrounds tend to go into psychology. A lot of people that have bad home lives tend to go into family stuff as well too when it comes to family psychology or something like that. I mean, same thing with addicts. Why is a person going to a certain drug? Probably because something's going on in their life too. But the issue is that they treat them like they're broken, and then you can't do that because you got to treat them as a person. I mean, same thing when it comes to someone who's intellectually disabled. We were talking off air. Treat them as a person. Talk to them. Don't like the dog talk. People do that like to normal people too, which is nuts to me. I'm like, how do you not get slapped? But it's just having a conversation and watching. Like I have a couple, at least in my town, there's a grocery store. A buddy I grew up with, basically. I mean, not like every day hanging out at each other's house or something. Just someone that was on my street. We rode the same bus. His mom works at the grocery place, food line. He pushes carts there, and I talked to her. I was like, so like, how's he doing? Is everything going with good? I'll talk to him as well too. But she tells me her biggest fear is like when she dies or something, like he's gonna be like 40 or something, living at her house the whole time, and she's afraid about what's gonna happen afterwards. And obviously, there's programs installed to be able to help somebody, make sure they're still able to feed themselves and do these things of the sort. But when you can understand that perspective and you can really grab a wholeness, and there's so many people out here complaining about their own lives and how shitty their lives is because they couldn't go to a party or something like that. I'm like, do you understand like there's something bigger at play here too? Like the fact that you can get up and have a conversation and walk is awesome. And then the fact that, like, go back to my buddy's mom, for instance, talking to her, she's like, but he's such a loving kid. He's such a wholesome person. He doesn't have any room for BS. I'm like, I can be jealous in that aspects as well too. Sometimes you can't step down from your own ideals to really understand and really be grateful for the things that you do have.
So there's two things there. The first that I agree with is that you definitely looking at other people's lives, looking at other perspectives is fundamentally important, right? And it's obviously incredibly important from policy point of view and from the support and everything that's available. What you did say, which I am a bit more hesitant to agree with, is comparing yourself to others, right? Just because somebody else has it worse doesn't mean that your problems aren't valid.
Oh no,
yes, they're on different. Yeah, they're on different planes. They're on different. And I completely understand that. Yeah, you need perspective. You need to broaden your horizons and actually get a frame of reference for your own life, maybe your own privilege, but it also can go down this very slippery slope. And it's that was the only thing where I'm like,
kind of interpreted that. I didn't mean it like that. I meant more like
I'm sure you didn't, but it's
there's a lot of comparing that goes on in society, and I don't think that's a just basis to really either devalue or try and value yourself. There's people that'll value their own life based on, I have a car, you don't. Or there's people that'll devalue.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I look at it like just the fact, like I'm probably more miserable than half the people out there that might be going through it, but that's a comparison too. But I look at it like you go through your own situations, you have your own avenues, and it also leads into a bigger idea of you can't deem your success or base your success or timeline or plot plan, whatever you want to call it, off of a motivational book. I mean, I get why they're needed too, but you can't try and deem yourself or structure yourself off someone that you see on social media, someone that you want to live like an influencer. You got to find your own rabbit hole in whatever way it takes to make yourself success, or whatever you feel like you can get up out of bed and not hate yourself. Because I mean, a lot of people don't like, I think during the pandemic, the big thing I talked about was about opening up who you were. Like, did you find yourself? And a lot of people go, well, I realized after working 30 years in a job and I lost it like that, it's kind of like, what do I want to do? Then they start making hot sauce. Now they got their own company and brand going out there. And I'm like, that's kind of like the important stuff, is that like, you only know what you know and you only see what you see. But if you look a little bit past that, what do you feel?
Yeah, no, that's true. Again, sorry, I'm like talking about the same thing. I feel like a little bit like a broken record, but yeah, it's the thing of, the pandemic, again, people, who lost their jobs, and for some people, they went away and, made their own hot sauce and have their own company. But again, that comes down to, you've got the means to get that started, right? And I'm not saying that people shouldn't do that. And people should absolutely, listen to themselves, listen to what feels right, what doesn't feel right. But for a lot of people, it's just not an option.
Yeah.
Right. You can't, people that work 3 jobs, they're not, it comes down to trying to balance that out. Right.
I mean, you could be happy doing anything like that. I know someone that just gets drunk in a McDonald's parking lot, and that's happiness to him. Is that a healthy way? I don't know, but I'm not going to judge him for it. If he's able to get through the day, he's functioning, doing a job and everything as well as that sort too. If that's the life that he wants and he understands it, then I'm not, there's a lot about changing, and there's a lot about like people trying to change other people, trying to do this type of thing too. But I look at it, I was like, do you feel like the need to change? It's like, I work at a gym. I'm a fitness guy. So I see so many people come and go, well, they say, go to the gym, get healthy. And I'm like, but do you want to? Like, you could do the same shit if you just go hiking. Like, if you want to get like lose some weight, then you can find other ways to do so as well too. Being in a gym facility where you might feel uncomfortable or something like that. And I'm not incentivizing people not to go to the gym. I'm just saying that's not your only option. There's never just one option in life. It's never that. There's never two. There's a billion. There's so many more than you could probably even fathom. Just like the universe, it's infinite.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Yeah, you should go for things that work for you. And, sometimes it's trial and error. Sometimes it's going to the gym to realize you don't like going to the gym, so yeah.
If I had to ask you, what's your goal that you're really aiming for with just the field of research that you study? Is there an end product to it, or you just love kind of finding new information every single time?
For me, it's definitely finding new stuff out and, gaining, like I say, I'm like perpetually curious. So for me, it's just finding stuff out, and I'll keep doing research for as long as somebody will pay me to do research, and to just find out how these different parts of the brains talk to each other. And, at some point, maybe venture into, okay, they're talking to each other. When are they talking to each other? How do they start talking to each other? So, it's learning that sort of how all these connections develop. And then, at some point, what would be very cool to study, which I don't know how anybody does it, but would be how we prioritize information, right? If I'm hungry and I'm sleepy, one day I might choose to eat, one day I might choose to sleep. And what changed, right?
That's got to be some like environmental something influence that comes into your life. Like people will, if they come from a good family value or something like that, they sometimes prioritize family first, and then other people prioritize work first because they have a good work ethic or something like that.
Yeah, so I think at some point it'd be very cool to study just how we prioritize things. But yeah.
And so, now, yeah, that's if you could choose a whole different career path.
Oh, I'd be a chef.
Why?
I have definitely not given this a lot of thought or anything.
Why?
But yes, if I had made different decisions, I would like to be a chef.
What type of restaurant?
It would be an Indian restaurant. It would be Indian home cooked food.
Is that because you really appreciate like the stuff you had like with your family and things of that sort?
Yes, and I've cooked. So my mum also loves cooking, and my grandmother used to love cooking, but also would send me out of the kitchen because she's like, you need to study and not cook. Because she was like, she's born in the 30s, and she's like very, very feminist. Like, you will study. So it's all right. But no, I really, really enjoy cooking, and it's also because of the science, right? It's chemistry at the end of the day. It's how flavors go together, how heat affects your food, how the surface area and the oil to onion ratio affects how the onion cooks, and so there's the science part of it as well. But there is all of the memory, all of the comfort, and for me and for my family, and I think it's true for a lot of Indians, food is just a big priority. It's how we all come together. Right? It's true across a lot of cultures, but yeah. So food, I would do stuff with food. I think backup plan for my partner and me is to get a food truck and drive it through South America. That is so. Given that chef training is will take far too long, and the beverage industries, the hospitality industry doesn't have the best of reputations. So
let me hear this food truck name. I know you thought about it.
No, we don't have a name yet because we're still arguing. Okay. We're still arguing.
What's the debate? What are the options?
We have, the debate is what kind of food we want to serve, right? Because if it's a food truck, you can't do sort of homey food, it has to be street food. But then do we want to do like full Indian street food. I love so Indo-Chinese.
Technical difficulties aside, we're back again. Would you like to do a whole nother podcast, or let's go back to the
No,
food
I think let's get back to the last bit.
Okay. So what
Yeah.
you were telling me about the cuisine that you wanted to make on this possible food truck? That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, so yeah, we've been arguing about whether it's going to be Indian street food, whether it's going to be like Indo-Chinese, which is what I want to do, but what my partner does not want to do. And then we're also like, maybe we'll just do pizza and just have like wacky toppings on pizza. And yeah, so we don't know. It'll be something or the other.
Would you look for something that would be incentivizing for you and your partner to make together, or are you looking for something that's going to like spark up like a culture or spark up some type of like new trend? Like people, I just saw I have a couple buddies who are friends of the podcast who've been on, and they make crazy whack ideas and stuff of that sort. But my buddy Robert Dumont, they make like, avocado or some type of like thing that's infused into something random that people have not really like tried before. And it's like a spark new trend.
So I think I would be doing all the cooking because I have control issues and my partner is not allowed to do, or if he cooks, I'm not allowed in the kitchen basically. Because I'm like, but you're chopping the onions wrong. So I would do all the cooking. I think it's the idea of, the reason I really like this Indo-Chinese idea is because it's what it's like the junk food I grew up with, right? It's what I loved eating, and it's this joy of bringing it to other people, and because it tastes nothing like actual Chinese food. So it's really nice. I'm like, well, maybe I want to share some of this with you. I don't think I have the know-how for trends, but I think it's really cool, right? Because it's interesting to me how flavors would mix with each other, but yeah, I don't know if I'm the person for that. I think I'm very much like, but try this recipe, it's delicious.
Yeah, that's why I appreciate like cooking so much, is not only the craft and how like hard of an industry it is, but I also appreciate like just the amount of smells and how they can, like, if you really like go to a restaurant, if you truly, and I don't want to be the person that stalks other people and like looks at them from another table or something. But when someone like appreciates food and it's like getting a link back to a certain memory, like Thanksgivings were always fun because everyone would grab a bunch of food. But now whenever I have turkey or something, I always think of those rare occasions. And like, I live in a seafood town, so all we have is like, fish or shrimp or something like that. So whenever I smell like a nice like cocktail sauce for like shrimp, I just get brought back with everything. It doesn't, if I'm traveling somewhere or something, someone pulls that out. Even if I smell it in a store, I'm like, oh, this remembers when I was doing jet skis during the summer. And it was like, I love that amazing experience, especially a nice Domino's pizza crust. Bro, like that. I don't know. It's the oregano. I know it's the oregano. I found it and I put it on my salads, and I'm like, okay, so this tastes like a Domino's pizza, but it's that combination and those weird little things where it's like, and especially doing fitness and all that, you find every trick you possibly can to like minimize calories, get your protein intake. So those scents, spices, and smells, stuff you really get to appreciate when, you go through something like this, or if you just want good flavored food and what you're eating is not it's healthy, but it's not necessarily the fun stuff.
Yeah, no, but and again, this like now goes back to neuroscience. I'm like, but like why do some foods trigger more memories? Not necessarily better or worse memories, but that there'll be some smells that will be like, oh, but that's the one that you always remember. But you could have eaten something else 100 times and you just won't.
You got to give me one
like
food,
link back into it.
You got to give me one food in your category or in your aspect of your life that has just one heartfelt memory with it.
Oh, so we do this thing. So it's basically potato fries, right? So it's shredded potato or like very thinly chopped potato that's fried. But we have it, so it's fried in mustard oil from where I'm from. And you have it with just, I used to have it with rice and with ghee, which is like a type of butter. And that was it, right? And so this was like my standard when we used to live in Calcutta with my grandparents, and my grandfather would pick me up from school because he'd retired by then. And then I would come home and that's what I would eat because it was like a filler thing that you ate. And that just makes me so happy. So like till date, that's like my big comfort food. It's like carbs with some fat, but it's great.
I just thought of the name for the food truck.
Oh yes, tell me.
Food for thought.
That I'm sure there's places that exist though. Like food for thought almost certainly already exists.
But they got a very good name. Did they got a neuroscience education?
That's true. That's
I mean,
true.
come on.
But does a neuroscience education contribute to how good your food's going to be?
Well, if you gave them like an IQ test or a survey test before they got food, be like, what's a food? What's a special memory with food? And they'll say like,
Yeah.
I always had fun at carnivals. And you're like, bam, they like
Yeah.
something with sugar or powdered sugar on it. And then boom, there you go. You got this
Yeah.
thing that hooks them back into their memories.
That's true. Customized, individually customized food. That would be good. Where like people, there's a film, right? The Johnny Depp film where I think it's called Chocolat, where this person comes in, has a conversation, and she finds the perfect chocolate for you. But the idea is the same, right? Like someone comes in, you have a conversation with them, and you find their favorite food or something that they would love to eat.
I just thought Charlie and the Chocolate Factory whenever I think of Johnny or Pirates of the Caribbean. How many chocolate films is he in?
I know this one I think is meant to be more serious, but it's a romantic film. I think it's just called Chocolat. But yeah,
I don't watch a lot of romantic films. I watched Squid Game recently, which
is great. Oh my god, it's so good.
What I don't get is that it's like kind of, I wouldn't say murder porn, but it's kind of like, it's terrible. It's horrible to watch this stuff, but then it's like you're stuck to it. I'm like, this started from Ninja Warrior, it led to Wipeout, and now it's leading into people dying. And I'm like, I don't know what the next step is.
Yeah. My favorite description of Squid Game is it's Black Mirror meets Hunger Games, which is
that does fit.
Yeah.
Just the games, though, I try and think if I would survive them, but I think I would think too. Like this is, I think the best part about that show is it kind of shows the perspective of like a bunch of people tackling a problem, and then someone comes in with a perspective you've really never seen, and it's just like weird how people think about things. Sometimes it's is it thinking too much or is it thinking too little, and then it's just kind of finding like that balance or how people get attracted to certain things as well too.
Yeah, and everybody, like you say, will attempt to solve a problem with their own experience, right? And that's like can be completely different perspectives. So yeah.
That's what I'm telling you. It does kind of all boil down to like the brain and thought, really, in a way. I mean, I'm surprised. Like there are times like when I think a situation, like for instance, with the power just going out, the first thing I thought was like, oh, wait for it to come back on. And then I was like, what happens if it doesn't come back on? And then you just start thinking, and it's also the reactionariness of every time I walked into a room, and I'm just saying this just happened to me, so I'm in trauma right now. But I would flick a light switch, and knowing the power wasn't on, like. It's that thing too. Like, do you ever find yourself doing something that you necessarily have done, but you don't really need to do it anymore? Kind of like where people develop OCD a little bit. Maybe you don't have OCD, but something along that line.
I think everybody, we do habitual things all the time, right? Like there's this whole thing of automation where you will, if you aren't like thinking about it, sometimes you'll just end up walking or driving to work, even though when you left the house, that's not what you intended to do. And then you'll be like halfway there, like, wait, I'm walking in the wrong direction. So automation is a big thing, right? Your brain goes into that mode very quickly.
Perfect question for you. Why, when I'm looking for like a place, I have to turn my radio down, and it's like it helps me.
Oh yeah. I don't know why, but it happens to me too, where I'm just like, oh, I'm like, when you're like looking for a door number and you're like, I turn my headphones off, and I'm like, why? I can see just as well with my headphones blaring music.
Do you ever start to look at things that like maybe something that's like been going, not even necessarily for you, but with people, like the radio thing, for instance? Do you ever just start to notice things like that? Like, why does that do that? Like, why do our brains do that?
All the time, I think I'll do something and just be like, but so for example, like I make my bed every morning. I know a lot of people make their beds every morning, but it's almost bordering on superstition, where if I make my bed, the day will actually be like quite okay.
Well,
right?
It makes
and
you feel successful.
It just almost sets you up. And some of it is just that I've made my bed every single day since I was a kid, and so if you've made your bed, then you're ready to start your day. But if I've not made my bed, say I'm like running late or woken up really late and I need to run out, and it'll just bother me for the rest of the day, right? And so
I either need to talk to a neuroscientist like you, or I need to talk to a therapist, because I have a superstition that if I'm on an airplane and there's a baby on there, it won't crash, all because God could never take away a baby. And I'm not religious, so I don't know why that superstition just brings me relief. Like, I think we all have factors of relief, which is like, it's interesting because I try and explain it. People are like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm like, I don't know. It's just a comfort.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, in general, superstitions don't make any sense, right? Because they're not grounded in anything. It's just actually, I listen to a lot of fiction podcasts. Like that's my go-to genre of podcasts. And I'm listening to this one. It's called. I don't work for them, so I can like not say the name. It's fine. But in that, there is a moment where they're discussing cultural superstitions, and it's meant to be like this college class where they're all discussing superstitions, and the professor goes around and asks people, what is an urban superstition that you believe in that you know cannot be based in any kind of, like it doesn't make any kind of logical sense. And so that was really interesting. So that came up.
What podcast was that?
And it's really, it's called The Burned Photo.
Okay.
It's really, I mean, it's slightly terrifying, but it's really good so far. I'm only 3 episodes in, so if it goes bad, don't blame me. But yeah.
Have you ever tried to figure out why people get interested into the things they get interested in? Like, for instance, like why is true crime so popular for a lot of people? Do you think it's about like solving a mystery, much like a secret, or discovering something, kind of like Christmas? You have that wantingness to want to know, like the curiosity of wanting to know what's under that present or what's under that wrapping.
Probably. I think it's also, interest can also be a trend thing, right? Like houseplant sales have risen exponentially so it's not because people earlier weren't interested in houseplants, but it's just that, more people have now maybe been exposed to this and like, oh, actually, this is great, right? And so now and I think that maybe has happened with, and also that goes, especially with the true crime thing, goes hand in hand with like podcasts have exploded, right, in the last decade or so. Oh, there's so many of them.
They're hitting a decrease now. It went from 3 million at the start of the pandemic to now back down to 1 million. Just I guess because either people got tired of doing it, they liked it and then dipped their toes, and now it's Twitch streaming or it's reacting videos.
Yeah. So some of it is like tied in with trends that happen. Some of it is just the amount that's available. Not that much. Maybe true crime stuff was as readily available as it is. So I think part of the interest might just be exposure, right? And part of it might be that maybe this cultural shift for like more serious themes, like so having conversations about racism, having conversations about sexism, ableism, all of this is happening more and more now because people are not calling it a taboo topic. People are not as hesitant to talk about it and to voice their experiences, their concerns. So I think it's probably, at least in my head, a mixture of different elements.
Now we're still kind of staying in like the more like skepticalness a little bit too, but I think I just forgot my question too. It was a good one too, because you mentioned the word taboo and it brought to my head because I was like, I try not to make any subjects taboo only because I feel like it gives them more power than necessarily we need them to. I think a lot of times the fear of like talking about certain things or discussing certain issues. Now there's more opinions that are more valid than others, obviously, if it particularly affects you. But I think everyone has a thought that they're able to speak it. I think that's where suppression builds up a lot of times too. It causes people to go to the end of the extremes, but I just wish that there's a healthy discourse amongst people. I feel like that's the most beneficial way to get something through. I mean, I've talked to plenty of people that have like dinosaurs aren't real, and I'm like, man, the dinosaurs aren't real. I've talked to a paleontologist who tell you it was, but then you hear them describe certain things, and I've seen the molds that they use to preserve the bones, and I'm like, oh yeah, if you come across that as your first picture, you're gonna think dinosaurs aren't real because that does look like a playground that kids will play on. And I think that's important because I mean, same thing with science, open communication. I mean, it's hard because especially with astronomy, at least from what I've discovered, and even if you look at the UFO people that study those things, a subtle little like bump or disagreement turns into this big kind of all out back and forth thing where then they just stop talking to each other. And I'm like, you guys are kind of interested in the same topic. Just because you have different views on what it is doesn't mean you're necessarily enemies. It just means you guys have that little bump. You can elevate it from there. And I think that's important in anything. I mean, science communication, even when it comes to an academic to a private person, like we were talking about before, or a scientist to scientist, sharing results, sharing ideas, lifting every single person up rather than putting one person down.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the way forward, right? We have to have meaningful discourse and be able to learn to disagree and come up with solutions that work. right, come up with policies that work. That's absolutely, yeah, that is what needs to happen.
And the fact that you came on my show out of probably listening to some of my crazy episodes and still being like, hey, I'll give it a shot. I appreciate that. I'd love to have you back on as well, too.
Thank you for having me on. This was really lovely. I didn't know what to expect. Yeah, I heard the Illuminati episode and I was like, I don't know what's going on.
That's a crazy one.
But yeah, so yeah, I will. Yeah, happy to be back if you need, if you would like.
Of
But yeah,
course. But
thanks very much for this.
before we wrap up the show, I wanted to give you a chance to say where your links are as well too, so people out there listening can go and find your. Is it just your Twitter profile, or you got any other sites?
So it's my Twitter profile. I'm also on the University of Bristol. You can search my full name. My boss is also on Twitter. He's really lovely. In case people are looking for a lab to join, he's called Paul Anastasiades. He is also on Twitter. It's P_Anastasiades. Good luck spelling that. Yeah, no, I think that's it. I'm mostly on Twitter. I think everything else is it is not a public facing.
Well, I'll make sure I link all your links in the description so people listening can find those too. And I appreciate you for giving me your time, and thank you for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank.